Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on the topic Artivism Beyond Borders, Challenging Postcolonial Narratives Through Global South Realities. This fourth panel is a continuation of the ICRRA conference on decolonial practices in international cultural relations, building trust, which started in November 2024. We are delighted to have you all with us, all of you with us for this season. Hopefully, you have been able to join the first three panels of the conference. If not, you can rewatch the sessions on the IFI YouTube channel. You can find the link for the conference playlist in the chat. Let me first introduce myself. I am César Villanueva, professor at Universidad Iberoamericana and La Esmeralda School of Arts in Mexico City. I am a member of the ICRRA network. ICRRA stands for the International Cultural Relations Research Alliance. I will be chairing this panel together with my colleague and friend, Eduardo Luciano Tadeo, Associate Professor in the Department of Politics and Culture at Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana Xochimilco, UAM, in Mexico City. The two of us, Eduardo Tadeo and myself, are also here as members of the North American Cultural Diplomacy Initiative, NACDI, from which you can learn more in the link attached to the chat. So before I introduce our panelists, let me say a little bit about ICRRA and the overall aim for this conference. The ICRRA network brings together global research and insights on the theory and practice of international cultural relations. When we talk about cultural relations, we are really talking about ways of working internationally in the areas of art, education, and civil society to build trust and understanding, to promote collaboration, and to enhance and sustain dialogue between people and cultures. However, international cultural diplomacy is still largely carried out with the help of infrastructures shaped by the legacies of European overseas colonialism. And if we hope to develop more inclusive and representative frameworks for our field, historical reflection, sorry, is essential, as are practices of relearning. With this conference, we aim to bring together different perspectives and provide a critical conversation on current post-colonial approaches and decolonial practices in the fields. In doing so, we will question the status quo in the frameworks of international policies, while providing a space for re-examination and reflection of who decides which epistemologies shape discourse. We do not wish the conference to be all-encompassing, but a laboratory, a place for dialogue and starting point for various processes and actions. We are glad to have you on board to be part of these discussions. Building on ICRRA's vision for society, I personally want to take a moment to express my concern with the current state of international politics and diplomacy. It feels as though there is very little room for fostering peaceful societies that truly embrace inclusion and diversity. I must denounce the rise of radical far-right politics and the influence of oligarchic mandates that are undermining democracy across the globe, including in Europe, Colombia, Mexico, and Canada. My hope is that the arts can serve as a reflective and powerful voice to help safeguard our nations from the dangers of authoritarianism. Please to post your questions, comments, and reflections in the chat as we go along, and we'll aim to cover as many of these as we can at the end of the season. Let me go to introduce our panelists. On today's session, it is my pleasure to introduce three wonderful artists working at different levels from three different parts of the Americas. Lyz Erika Torres Ramos is a Colombian artist, curator, researcher, and education policy consultant. In her multidisciplinary work, she focuses on memory, curatorship, and popular knowledge. Working closely with communities, she uses photography, video, drawing, and collective actions to empower local identities. Her role in Latinismo supports self-managed platforms, amplifying Latin America voices and fostering dialogue across geographies. Our second participant, Priscilla Vallejo Doblado, is a multidisciplinary visual artist, professor, and cultural manager. Her work is focused on exploring the feminine universe, the body, and its interaction with the environment from a social and anthropological perspective, with a particular emphasis on daily life. Her artistic practice stems from graphic thinking and extends into various disciplines, such as object art, installation, painting, and textiles. Finally, we have the wonderful Rafael Lozano-Hemmer, who is a Mexican-Canadian media artist who works at the interface of architecture and performance art. He creates platforms for public participation by using technologies such as robotic lights or telematic networks. In addition to 18 solo exhibitions, Lozano-Hemmer's art has been shown at several biennales worldwide. As the first artist to represent Mexico at the Venice Biennale with an exhibition at Palazzo Van Axel in 2007. Now let me tell you a little bit about the way we're going to go with the panel. The panel will begin with a series of 10-minute presentations from each of our panelists. Lyz will start, followed by Priscilla, and Rafael will close. Afterward, we will move into a 20-minute discussion among our panelists, focusing on key questions raised during their presentations. Finally, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. Feel free to share your comments and questions in the chat. Eduardo will gather all of them and pass them along to our panelists as the panel progresses. All the questions will be addressed according to the time. So we will start now, leaving the floor for Lyz Erika Torres Ramos. Lyz, you can start now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, César, and thank you everybody for being here. Okay, I'll start with the name of this part of my conference, of my talk, and it is self-management in art, resilience and fragility of the spectacle. And I want to talk since the fragility of a human being, but also since the fragility of an artist. Self-management is not a hashtag. It's not one of those phrases you find on the wall of a hipster coffee shop while you wait for your organic cappuccino. It is not a career or a trendy concept for curators. In the arts, self-management is a practice born of necessity, even a political position, if you will. It comes from looking around and realizing that if you keep waiting for institutions or the market to give your permissions to exist, you will be waiting for a long time. So we decide to act. In general, in Latin America, we decide to act. You decide to create with what you have and from when you are. But let me clarify a little bit about it. Self-management is not a heroic act or an enlightened path to artistic nirvana. It's a daily exercise on dealing with uncertainty, an uncomfortable moment when you realize that art is not a shiny spectacle always, but a construction full of patches, affective networks, and chaos. That it's in general my work. Today, I'll show you how I have been walking through chaos, but lucky me, always with others, and always as a learning exercise. So I'll begin with narratives of power related to spaces. Spaces tell stories, and stories told in our spaces are imbued with power. What were once factories full of workers are now pristine galleries. What were once working-class neighborhoods are now cultural districts with cafes where a cookie costs as much as a full meal. In this sense, art becomes a narrative of progress that often displaces the very communities that it claims to represent. In Bogota, working with silversmith in working-class neighborhoods, I saw this dynamic clearly. Spaces filled with memory and knowledge passed down through generation face a constant threat, the risk of being replaced by something deemed better. In the Actos de Fe project, I met artisans who didn't just transform metal, and they transformed their craft into an act of resistance. I remember one day, Don Jose, I don't know if you can help me maybe with the slides. Yes, the next one, please. This is my cows, but go to the next one. And the next one. Yes, thank you. So I remember one day Don Jose, one of the master silversmiths, handed me a chisel and said, try it. It's the only way to learn. As I struggled to carve a line into the base of a globet, he told me stories about how each tool in his workshop had its own story, how he created his own machines, and how the workshop was a school for his children and his community. At the end of the day, we shared a meal of fish cooked in the same oven used to melt silver. That moment reminded me that art isn't always the showcases. Sometimes it's in the everyday gestures that sustain collective memory. Let's go to the next one. Can you please play a little bit?
Lo que lo hace surgir desde sí mismo. Mi contorno surge de la casa, de la educación, de las vivencias, del hacer, del reflexionar. Mi contorno está marcado en mi cuerpo, en mi manera de ver el mundo.
Okay, thank you. So here I just put a little part of a conversation where he was trying to explain me how silver maybe could evaporate while he was cooking the fish for eating in the dinner. So what about this? I consider that this is the exercise of memory that communities do all the time. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so you could be free just moving the slides while I'll talk. I learned something similar in another community in Santa Fe, Antioquia. That's a conflict zone on the western part of Colombia. There, gold is not a luxury or a symbol of power. It's the basis of life. Rural miners collect it to eat, to feed their families, and they struggle all the time with territory and visible borders. I spent several weeks in their workshops listening to their stories, giving them my camera for generating their own registers and going to the mountain for finding gold. But what left the deepest impression on me was what happened during the workshop we organized with the local museum. The miners had collected a small amount of gold, barely like 2 grams, and decided not to sell it, to be not under the necessity. Instead, they donated it as a memorial. This gesture, as small as it's powerful, spoke to me something deeper than economic value. I was reminded that the value lies in stories, We build around what we create, especially in art. One morning, after being in Barequeo, that it's how they call to wash big amounts of soil until they find the gold, on the banks of the Cauca River, we shared a sancocho, that it's a typical soup here in Colombia, and talked about what it means to work with your hands, what it means to sustain a community, what it means to sustain the memory and in the violence that they experiment all the time. Art, like life, doesn't always require epic gestures, maybe just epic conversation, like with Don Jose, and some trust and collectivity. And that's what I have felt in this role of curator. It is a kind of distressing role sometimes because it is seen as a figure of power. And speaking of trust in the artist communities, we are very distrustful of each other. That's the usual relation. We live more in suspicion than in bonding, more in judgment than in cooperation. And there, the figure of curator comes in the media with all that. It has helped me to work with families of artisans to enter the art circuit with an attitude of open listening, of familiarity, and to understand that it is a rigid system, but that it is a cracks like any other system. And you know that there is where the power lies, on the crack precisely. Let's go to the last, the one that is before this. Before. Thank you. In the image, for example, you see a work by Paulo Nazaret, a Brazilian artist, partner and part of Latinismo, collective with which I'm currently working as a curator. Paulo never takes a plane and always travels on foot, by bus or bicycle from Brazil to the United States. And from the South, he goes out to ethnograph the white man, as he says, and ends up in New York selling his works in Soho galleries to donate most of the proceeds to the communities of Belo Horizonte. He is an epic artist, for example, who has taught me a lot about trust in the world. In the other image is one of the vulva butterflies of Erika Harsh, a woman, colleague and artist who also wanted to get into Latinismo and who speaks loudly from the body, the migration borders, and was sanctioned in the Middle East for daring to turn vulvas into butterflies. So now we can go to the next one. Thank you. The most fragile moment in art is not at the opening or in the vitrines. It's during the installation for me. The unpainted walls, the dusty floors, the works still in their crates. It's the chaos before perfection, where everything seems about to fall apart, but it's also the place where you see art for what it really is, a narrative process. And as curator, I have the big responsibility to listen and create common narratives. I think that the ring, the disorder, the eagerness to put on a show, to take care of the wideness of the walls and visually elevate the works is an operation of hyper-control, but that all artists know how to play well. You who know about diplomacy know well that there are invisible powers like that of an art exhibition in which we seek to attack the spectators to see if they will let us be Latinos without the manichaeism of the colonized and the colonizers, the victims and the adversaries, and all that in the middle of a show in which we know that we will still play with exoticisms and pre-readings about our condition as Latinos. And we are not ashamed to make perorata, as we say here in Colombia, which translates as in colloquial terms. The Uruguayan artist Luis argues that art, at its core, it's a form of education, not in the sense of imparting knowledge, but in its capacity to open questions. I understood this deeply when working on amplify, women, voice, and resistance. This project recovered archives of speeches, songs, and declarations by Colombian women silenced throughout history. But it wasn't just about rescuing words. It was about giving them back a body, creating a physical presence that could even traverse the spectator's own corporeality, an utopian ideal in curatorial practice like so many others. I think we can go to the video and you can play it, please.
Nanya wala suskatia karias wayos katia no hori shimer no hori sirhi no achunto no suwayu
Estamos hoy que es la tires chichemos mayas to na que shimo honshu
Chigualo. Adiós, niñito, la gloria te está llamando. Adiós, niñito, la gloria te está llamando. Adiós, niñito, la gloria te está llamando. Niñito, subite al cielo. La gloria te está llamando. Anda, limpia los caminos.
Somos luchadoras iguales que los hombres. Cuando vamos al campo de batalla nos toca enfrentarnos con puros hombres.
Imagínese uno amamantando un bebé y que suene plomo en el puesto de guardia.
Estámonos aquí, entrincherémonos aquí, cubrámonos.
Yo estoy de servicio de guardia.
De caso de un ataque enemigo. Ahí viene plomo del lado y lado.
Caen las bombas y corriendo para ir para acá con una barriga tan grande.
Okay, thank you. An amphibrush is technically a tone that only the female glories can produce. That physical detail became the project's core. These voices weren't just memory, they were presence. As you listened, for example, there was a pregnant woman from the guerrilla talking about how to manage to be pregnant in the middle of the war. So they were embodied resistance. For the installation, it was a big, large, spectacular glottis, kind of a tunnel, and it was constructed in the middle of a park in Bogota's downtown, that is the center of power in Bogota. Day and night, it emitted feminine sounds, songs, whispers, cries. Some passerby there to enter curious, while others kept their distance because it was a little bit frightening for them, and perhaps unsure for what such a visceral space might evoke. The glottis wasn't just an object or a sound, it was a confrontation, a reminder that memory isn't something stored passively. It's alive, embodied, demanding to be felt. It reminded me that the body is not just a medium for expression, it is an archive, a battleground, a site of possibility, as in Erika Hart's Butterflies. I think we can go to the next one, please. Thank you. So, in conclusion, for me, self-management and cultural diplomacy are not opposing forces, but complementary paths. While self-management builds from necessity and the margins, cultural diplomacy amplifies those voices, opens doors, and challenges dominant narratives. Both practices are essential to ensuring that art transcends border, physical and symbolic. It's a constant dialogue between the local and the global, between the intimate and the spectacular. And it is the intimacy that, in my opinion, lies the micro-power of art as a discipline that creates possibilities and collectivities. Here in the last images, I just put a map of the institutional features, so we can go to the next one. This is part also of Latinism. This is a map of New York. It's a featured institutional map. So I just put the institutional features, and I mean features as the places where we could be there, and encounters that we are having in Latinismo as collectivity, and how we are in the in-between always, in between by institutions and self-management. In the end, it is not the objects or the showcases that remain, but the relationships we build while creating art. The sancochos by the Cauca River, the 2 grams of gold given a memento, listening to the women in Amphibrak, the fish cooked in the silversmith oven, the gaitas on the streets of Manhattan, because we were working with friends in the streets just to call people to our show, and cultural diplomacy, the circuits, the shows, and the spectacle in general, when understood well and worked since affectivities, since the relations and since trust, don't strip art of its humanity. It amplifies it. Because art, more than spectacle, it's a way of imagining together. Meanwhile, we are creating the show, we are fragile people, and we just survive and resist based on our relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lyz. Such a wonderful presentation, rather critical of the circumstances that Latin American artists and Latin American systems of art get people in between, get artists in between without possibilities to express in full their capacities. I will come back to that in the second part of the conversation. It's time now to let Priscilla Vallejo come in with the presentation she has prepared for us today. Priscilla, please welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining to this presentation today. I'm going to start. Well, thank you. When I was invited to this forum by Dr. César Villanueva, I was still working as academic coordinator at La Esmeralda, one of the most prestigious public art schools in Latin America that belongs to the National Institute of Fine Arts and Literature. There, I studied for my bachelor's degree in Fine and Visual Arts. Later, I coordinated the academic extension and international relations area for 9 years. And also, I taught painting, experimental graphics, and art history for 4 years. Leaving this place, which has been my home since 2007, is now a challenge I'm beginning to face. I mention it because it marks a very important part of my professional development and to touch on the topic of public institution as part of the art system. If you could please slide my images while I'm talking, I'm not have any time, thank you. As a student, I had the privilege to experience a vibrant Esmeralda with renowned professors, including Dr. Villanueva. As head of academic extension and international relations, my priority was fostering connections abroad, creating academic mobility protocols still implemented in all professional schools within the National Institute of Fine Arts and Literature, and organizing visits from renowned Mexican artists as well as international artists from countries such as Argentina, Colombia, Spain, Australia, Kenya, United States, and Cambodia, to name just a few. I also had the opportunity to restructure the continuing education program that still generates resources for the school, alongside the artist Carla Ripi, who has been the school's director and a huge support to me. We established Saturday workshops for the general public, seeking exposure to contemporary art practices. Okay, surviving through art, education, production, management, and resistance, as I am calling my contribution to this forum, was a title of my undergraduate thesis and has since become more just a title. It is a life strategy that constantly reflects on how economic and social circumstances have led me to explore beyond artistic production, integrating cultural management and teaching as pillars of my professional practice. In this regard, I reflect on the idealization of artistic practice and the confrontation with a reality that demands adaptation and diversification to survive. Resistance, understood as perseverance and as an act of commitment to my profession, has been the axis that allows me to continue on this path despite adversities. My trajectory in visual arts has been marked by a constant pursuit of resistance and transformation against the power structures that have been historically shaped art and society. From artistic production, cultural management, and teaching, I have found tools not only to professionalize my practice, but also to question and dismantle the hierarchies that perpetuate exclusion, inequality, and the imposition of hegemonic values. In this sense, my artistic and educational practice has been built for a perspective that places the body, identity, and community work as critical as transformative access. One of the most important lines of my artwork is the reinterpretation of traditional practices associated with femininity and the knowledge historically relegated by colonial and patriarchal narratives. I think we can pass to my production slides, please. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. I grew up in a profoundly matriarchal environment, surrounded by women who wove, sewed, and embroidered as part of their daily lives. The most important was my mother, a fashion designer and an incredible cook, who did so purely out of love and care for us. These so-called domestic tasks are loaded with cultural meanings that have been underestimated by hegemonic structures of Western art. In my work, these practices are not only a source of inspiration, but also a political act of resistance. By incorporating embroidery, weaving, and sewing as creative tools, I am not seeking to romanticize the past, but to reclaim the critical value of these languages, of the value I find in female collectives, whether bound by blood or by choice. My pieces reframes the meanings of these everyday objects, transforming them into vehicles of questioning gender narratives and the hierarchies imposed by power systems. In this way, my work becomes a means to recontextualize cultural symbols and revalue the knowledge that has been made invisible for centuries. My artistic production stems from the conception of the body as a social and political territory shaped by dynamics of control. From a critical perspective, the female body is not only a space where patriarchal oppressions manifest, but also a place of resistance and reconstruction. My most recent project, Catexis, on which I have worked over the past years, deals with emotional burdens and explores how human relationships are conditioned by desire, control, and territorialization. In this series, I use symbolic elements and intervene in everyday objects to create visual allegories of the power dynamics that shape human relationships, especially in context of machismo and inequality. These works confront how female identity has been molded by a society that commodifies insecurities and exploits gender stereotypes. From this perspective, the body is not only a victim of power structures, but also a site where this can be subverted and reimagined. Okay, then we can pass to the teaching, please. Oh, we're seeing my art pieces. Okay. Well, now it's a part of work in progress. those are only illustrative images. Well, okay, thank you. My work as a teacher has been a space to promote a post-decolonial practice in art education. During my years at the National School of Painting, Sculpture, and Printmaking, La Esmeralda, I worked on projects that connected the students with their sociocultural realities and encouraged critical reflection of the role of art in social transformation. In May of last year, I raised my hand when the opportunity arose to create a mural at the Polytechnic University of Valencia in Spain. When this was confirmed, my first thought was to include my group of students from the experimental graphic production workshop. In collaboration with my partner, visual artist Yamil Chaban, we proposed a project based on Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's text, How to Make Yourself a Body Without Organs, which explores the concept of a body freed from hierarchical and oppressive structures, proposing an open space for flows of desire and experimentation. Each student worked on fabric fragments through graphic thinking, resulting in monotypes, transfers, embroidery, weaving, assemblages, etc. At the Polytechnic University of Valencia, Jamil and I conducted an active workshop where local students also intervened in fabric fragments. This was an intersection of two art schools from different latitudes. Mexico, the colonized country, and Spain, the colonizer, resulting in a kind of historical reconciliation. The energy generated was overwhelmingly positive and integrative, promoting creative freedom and formal exploration through graphic thinking. The project, predominantly involving women, reinforced a narrative of collaboration and resistance against the dynamics of exclusion in the art world. This mural was not only the final artwork, but a communal process emphasizing the value of graphic thinking as a space of creative freedom and intercultural dialogue, allowing participants to address topics such as oppression, autonomy, and reconstruction from their perspectives. We are about to release a virtual catalog of all this process, which will be available on my website very soon. From a cultural management perspective, I have sought to open spaces that challenge the barriers between art institutions and communities. As head of academic extension at La Esmeralda, I created educational programs aimed at diverse audiences, from Saturday workshops for beginners to international academic mobility projects. These initiatives aim to strengthen the professionalization of artists and foster dialogues that challenge traditional hierarchies of art. One of my main concerns has been questioned the idea that art must operate exclusively within institutional parameters. For me, cultural management is a tool to decolonize art, connected with communities' experience and needs. This approach not only exposes structural inequalities, but also proposes inclusive, horizontal processes. Finally, my analysis seeks to connect my personal experience with a broader reflection on the role of art in contemporary society. I consider art to be simultaneously a space for personal transformation and a critical tool that questions cultural structures. Through my production and work, I strive to contribute to the discussion about the role of the artist today, reclaiming artistic practice as an exercise in resistance and a means to make sense of the complexities of our environment, always with the intention of abolishing from my trench, the tyranny of art that only reflects fears and insecurities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. Such a wonderful presentation that really encompasses both your experiences as a teacher, as a curator, as a manager in the arts, a famous art school, but also as a producer. So thank you so much for this. We'll come back to address some issues in the second part. It's time now to leave the floor to Rafael Lozano-Hemmer. He doesn't need much introduction. Rafael, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'll start by just sharing a deck. I have a variety of little videos to illustrate some of our approaches for the theme that I was invited to present. I'm extremely excited to be sharing the panel with these two wonderful artists, and thank you so much for having me on in this presentation. So for a very long time, I've been making artworks that are incomplete and out of control. It means that these artworks are platforms for people to take over and to feel integrated or in relation to a particular artistic or critical context. Very early on, I've been fascinated by the asymmetry of power, of metrics, of vigilance, of surveillance. And I've been making artworks that deal with these subjects with the hope to create a little interruption in the way, usually a techno-optimist way, that we see technology somehow resolving some of the problems that we have. Some of the projects that I have are quite perverse. This one in particular is an asphyxiation chamber that invites the public to go into a hermetically sealed box to breathe the air that has already been breathed by everybody before you. So there is massive warnings against contagion, panic, and asphyxiation. And yet people still go in there through the decompression chamber, the fresh air goes out, and then you're invited to sit in this cube and breathe for as long as you want the collected air. In the show in MOAC Museum in Mexico, we got 255,000 people breathing in the air. It was quite disgusting. And the spirit of this project, like many others, is to really think about the commons. Well, who owns the air? Who owns the water? Who owns the earth that we stand on? At the time that I made this work originally, the CEO of Nestle had said that water was not a fundamental human right. And that, of course, makes sense since they own Evian and San Pellegrino and all the bottled water facilities. So the question of the commons, of making visible the atmosphere as a tangible asset that is not being counted in the economic output figures was critical here. Now, in terms of participation, oftentimes people like myself who make interactive art think of interactivity as personalizing and empowering and giving agency to the public. Well, in this piece, if you participate too much, you die. So it's a perversion of this idea of participation. In fact, your participation makes the air more toxic for future participants. And the spirit of the project is to think about how we are ourselves inside a bubble with 8 billion people who are sharing that same air. So I'll continue pieces that are inside of a museum, but then I'll go out to show what I think is closer to Artivism. So this is a project made with Krzysztof Wojcicko, a great Polish artist that I collaborate with. Let me just stop that. There we go. That I collaborate with. He had access to the way in which the secret police, the police in Poland, in communist Poland, where he was brought up, would actually limit the number of people that could be assembled in public space. And there are rules about how far away you needed to be to somebody else before your relationship was seen as suspicious. So this artwork from almost 10 years ago basically tracks people, but more importantly, it determines how far away they are from each other, for how long, and then whether that interaction is suspicious, and it gets archived. So a lot of the works that I do in museums have to do with questioning the neutrality of the exhibition space, right at the boundary between the seduction of participation and selfies and reality TV, and then the violence of tracking and making visible the mechanisms by which these technologies are tracking us. In 2015, with the disappearance of 43 students in Ayotzinapa, in Guerrero, in in Iguala, in Guerrero, we learned that the 43 students that were kidnapped were not found. And we thought, well, we routinely use AI systems to do face recognition for certain artworks. And we trained this face recognition system with the faces of all the 43 students in such a way that when you stand in front of this work, it analyzes your facial features and it compares you to the database of disappeared to see who you look like the most. And most importantly, to give you a level of confidence saying, well, our level of confidence that you are this person is only, say, 17%, results student not found. This project was not an artwork as much as it was a campaign. Anybody from anywhere could download the software from our website for free. It's still there. And it has been shown in hundreds of educational institutions, galleries, cultural centers all around Mexico and around the world. The spirit of an artwork like this is not so much to find them, because likely they are now dead, but rather to create a sense of empathy, a sense of connection to this loss, and to keep the search always alive, because there's no forensic evidence that the story that the government tells us about their disappearance is true. So the search is internal, is fraternal. And then finally, about this particular project, the spirit of it is that it's generated some income. So whenever it's exhibited or even sold to collections like the MOAC Museum, any proceeds go directly to the families of the disappeared to help them pay for their forensic evidence, lawyers, and so on and so forth. So in 2019, during Trump's first term, first go at fascism, we made a project across the U.S.-Mexico border. So what you're seeing on the left is the city of Ciudad Juárez in Chihuahua, and on the right, the city of El Paso. Now, these cities had always been together for 100 years before the U.S. ever existed. Already, this was a living community. And right now, they form the largest binational city in the Western Hemisphere, divided, of course, by the Rio Bravo, the Rio Grande, and then also by now Trump's wall. So what you see is these three bridges of light. The spirit of the project is that we had 6 stations, 3 in Mexico and 3 in the United States. They were identical. These stations consisted of a microphone and a loudspeaker, a light, and it also had a little tuning dial, something like a knob that you could turn. And when you would turn this knob, automatically the searchlights would be controlled and scan the horizon in the other country in such a way that you could tune the sound of somebody else. So when your lights and somebody else's lights intersected in midair, it would open bidirectional channel of communication across the border so that you could listen to them and they could listen to you. Importantly, if you didn't like what they were saying, you would simply tune them off and find somebody else to hear. So again, 6 stations, you could tune any of the other 5 at any given time. These conversations took place over a period of a couple of weeks every night. Tens of thousands of people came to the border, not to be divided, but to actually come together. The spirit of the project was, of course, how do you take something as violent as these searchlights, which, of course, famously, at least in Europe, you have Albert Speer, you have the architecture of intimidation. And here in North America, whether they're used for after victory parades, now they're used for things like shopping malls or the opening of a new discotheque. In the particular region of the border, these searchlights is the icon of La Migra, of these helicopters that look for migrants in the borders. So there's a particular violence to these lights. And the spirit of this project is not so much to create bridges in between the people from both sides, but to highlight that those bridges are already existing. These cities are fraternally connected. 70% of the people on one side have family on the other side. They are environmentally, economically, historically connected. And so this project just allowed people to come together, as I was saying. And people also oftentimes it was quite a bipolar project. These two ladies don't know each other. They're talking about the Walmart shooting of Mexicans and how Mexicans are afraid to go to El Paso, and then vice versa. The people from El Paso are afraid to go to Mexico because of the feminicidios and the rampant violence and so on. But above and beyond the stereotypes of what is being said about the region of the border, which of course serve the interests of people who are trying to militarize that border and to dehumanize the people living there, the region is extremely vital and vibrant and full of artists and musicians. So we invited them to take part in these projects. And we try to send a message that was just beyond what the normal language is used on the border. So you also got a lot of serenades and poetry and feminist rappers, batallones femeninos against Adelitas fronterizas. You'd get different kind of content that I don't have time to discuss, but basically the spirit is that these projects are out of control in the sense that nobody tells you what to do or not. And then if it weren't for people participating, the project would not exist. So the spirit of these projects is, as an artist, what you can do in public space, especially in terms of artivism, is to give light, is to put a spotlight on those voices that are not being heard. There is a sense of these technologies happening to us and being used to control us. How can we misuse these technologies of spectacle to create intimacy instead of intimidation? And this project was, in my opinion, moving and important, not because of what I did, but because of the way in which people took over to the mics and made it their own. So, I should mention that we also had every night before we opened the microphones to the general public, we had over 150 groups of artists and rappers and poets and historians speak through the mics to start up the project. So that's Border Tuner. And I show you two more things. One of them, actually, I'm going to skip this. No time. And instead, I'll speak about this one. So now, what you're seeing is a beta of a project that we're doing called Global Level of Confidence. So the same software that we use to look for the 43 students of Ayotzinapa, we're working with the abuelas de la Plaza de Mayo in Argentina to train the AI with the over 30,000 disappeared during the Argentinian dictatorship, and create a project which is actually just going to be a web page that you can access through your phone or your computer, and automatically uses face recognition to see who looks like you the most from these disappeared, murdered activists. And then once you find who you look like the most, you can click on their name if you're curious, and it gives you a full piece of information about where they were last seen, where they were captured, and details that may help you make links to it. And then finally, there's that bottom right, set up an appointment at the genetic bank. As you may know, Argentina has hundreds of people who think that their mom and dad are their mom and dad, only in fact, it's the killers of their mom and dad. They're complicit with the dictatorship, because among the brutal things that the dictatorship did is just take all the orphaned kids and give them to the military regime. So what has been happening in Argentina is there is a constitutional right for your identity. But part of the problem is two problems. Number one is Milei is now in power. So just like the Latin American Trump is there. And one of the things that he's doing is strangling any efforts to have this collective memory about the killings. They, among other things, deny that it was 30,000. Well, here you have all of their stories and all of their background. And then the second problem is that not enough Argentinians are actually going to set up a genetic bank appointment, because normally you don't mistrust your mom and your dad. You think that your mom and your dad are fine. But if you were to be interested in going to the genetic bank with almost 100% certainty, they can tell you if your parents are in fact, some of these missing people. And of course, the abuelas and the siblings and oftentimes the uncles and the family is looking for these people. So level of confidence as a global tool will come out in a couple of months. So I wanted to show that because I think one of the key things in making this kind of art is that the artist is a facilitator. The artist is a citizen. The artist is somebody who sets up the conditions for other voices to be heard. So that's my presentation, and I hope I did okay with time.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much, Rafael. Such three wonderful presentations we have had already. I don't want to continue without mentioning that we are speaking from Bogota in Colombia, from Mexico City in Mexico, and from Toronto in Canada. So
Montreal, please.
From where?
Montreal.
Montreal, sorry.
The opposite of Toronto.
The opposite of Toronto. Okay. Great. So this conversation has that possibility of also listening to voices in the Americas. The second part, I wanted to ask the three of you now engaged in a small conversation and asking our audience to please post your questions or comments so we can channel them through our guests today is a simple question. I don't have time to really elaborate on more. I had other ideas, but I want you, each of you, to take 2, 3 minutes to say a little bit if the idea of artivism, which is at the core of this conversation, is still relevant today, and to what extent the capacity of this combination of artistic expressions and activism, political activism, is still relevant in today's world. As you listen at the beginning of my presentation, I also felt that, and I also feel that today's world is extremely radical in letting us enter a space of um, authoritarianism, where you have very little limited spaces to really enjoy freedom and liberty as a capacity to grow as human beings. And the whole idea of ICRRA is to actually promote understanding, uh, common dialogues, and plurality. But it seems that the type of forces that are falling upon us are exactly the contrary. So, what's the role of artivism in today's agenda for the arts, for the art system? How do you envision the future of artivism? Is it possible to continue, or should we continue this way or not? What do you say, Lyz, about this? 2, 3 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, I think as I told you in my presentation and linking with Priscilla and Rafael, that we need it. It's a necessity and a natural space for the global south. I consider, as I told you, that the power, as you tell, is taking like a rhythm that it's closing the voices for many people from the south, for many communities. So art is a way, in artivism, is a way to open those spaces to these voices. And as I told, we have this invisible power, creating images, creating different ways to express. So I think it's crucial and it's necessary.
Thank you very much. Priscilla, what's your take on this? And I would also like to add a little layer on that to say that we probably are very much driven to think about big structures of power, such as the United States or China or Europe as such. But sometimes the authoritarian mentality happens to be in the small places where even in intimate places where you work, where you live, where you socialize. How can we escape these ideas of being controlled or subjugated by external forces, not promoting this actually free capacity to think and to behave? What would be your idea, Priscilla, of artivism today?
Well, I think that the art is a place so you can where you can express and tell everything you need to express and tell. I mean, working with students has been my latest approach to all this thinking, and I think that the voices in each one are very important. So when you gather all these ideas and make yourself with all these people that need to raise their voice, you can do something bigger in the arts or through the arts. So if we let apart the ego and other stuff in the art, maybe we can do more in pro of the activism. So now we have a lot of political and social matters that we need to speak about it. So the art is the best place to do it. So we can criticize all the context, all the situation from the little, I mean, not little, but from the individual thinking, and then rather all this knowledge and speak out loud. So maybe I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And Rafael, you've been working throughout the world in many different ways. I would like you to add up another layer. What are the risks of and the limits of using artivism? I think at top of the mind, the idea of trivialization, ephemeral effect, or the instrumentalization of these tactics that actually do not really conclude into something meaningful to change realities, social realities. What's the role of artivism today in your view?
Well, first of all, I very much disagree with you that it does not change the conditions. The people who participate in these projects are changed. There is a sense of solidarity, of empathy, of interconnection. There is a sense of the border being a place for people to come together, not to be separated. This is critical. We have the imaginary to work with. The imaginary and the symbolic is extremely powerful. These are powerful tools that the artist as citizen or as artivist utilizes. And now I'm not saying that we can actually change on the ground politically, the profile of a situation. But this is one of those things where, like Alejandro Jodorowsky used to say, we can't change the world, but we have to start changing it. And this is, I think, just a question of coherence, of mental clarity. At a time when the United States is being taken over by a new type of fascism and many other countries too, it is a critical question to ask ourselves, what are we going to share with our grandkids when they ask us, what did you do at the time of our environmental decimation? What did you do at the time of this nationalist, racist situations? And then we need to turn around and ask ourselves that question. We are complicit with it. It's very difficult to be outside of it. But at the same time, we have some tools, we have some vocabulary, some power to actually interfere with the situation. I wanted to take this opportunity to also say that to me, this question, so I'm old, so I had an opportunity to personally meet people like Edward Said or Maria Fernandez or Stuart Hall. And I'm here to tell you that the idea of this post-colonial critique is not something that we talk in terms of time. There was a beautiful report out of Oxfam a couple of days ago about how there's nothing post about colonialism. right now we have modern day colonialism. And I think that that's important to always highlight because it's not just a question of reparations or a question of historical justice. Of course, that needs to be part of the argument. But moving forward, the mechanisms of they talk about debt colonialism, digital colonialism, knowledge colonialism, financial trade, institutional, green language colonialism, all of those things. I really recommend people to go to oxfam.org to read this latest report because it's not like something that we have now succumbed to and or are over, but rather it's something that is very critical to continue to be connected with.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I would like to engage into a conversation, but let's listen to what the audience has to say. Eduardo, I don't know if you have some of the questions from the audience. We can probably let the people express their opinions. There's Gregor Matti, who is raising his hand. Gregor, would you like to comment on? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for these very inspiring examples and thoughts. And I was wondering exactly about the last question you raised, the question of artivism. So I live in Spain, but I'm originally from Austria, Germany, and there I very much perceive that those artists who see themselves as artivists and who very much take seriously also their responsibility, just like Rafaela now said, that they are perceived by the majority society increasingly as a detached elite, right? And especially in the discourse of the new authoritarian right, they're also stigmatized and even ostracized as the elite. So in the end, even though they try and aim to engage in dialogue with the wider society and a larger audience. In the end, they remain limited in a space of an audience that's very susceptible to their critique and their projects and their artivism. But in the end, not to actually the people that they are seeking to address and are seeking to challenge in their behavior, in their thoughts, in their political opinions. So I was wondering what especially thinking that of course artivists I imagine that speak from the global south, just like Mrs. Torres also said, they're claiming a space for their voice. So I was wondering what your perspective was on this challenge, if you had experienced something similar and what your response might be to this. Thank you so much.
Gregor, where are you speaking from? Where are you located?
I'm living in Madrid, in Spain.
Great. Thank you very much. Eduardo, let's take 2 or 3 more questions so we wrap up the conversation with some of the comments or questions. Is there any question you see in the chat, Eduardo?
Sure, there are a couple of questions posted to the participants. So if you allow me, the first one is coming from Sandra Montoya, researcher of the Latin American Institute for Higher Studies. She posted a question for Rafael Lozano, and basically she's asking if the perspective on about his perspective on the validity and importance of the Border Turner project, particularly in the context of the Trump administrator's migration policies in the US, and how do you assess its impact since 2019, especially in terms of the stigmatizing migrants? Also, we have a question from Med Ali for Rafael Hemmer, who says, in Breathing the Same Air initiative, you turn an everyday universal act, such as breathing the same air, into an artistic statement. Did you intend to remind us that Artivism can originate from such simple everyday acts rather than grand showcases and performances? This idea resonates with John Dewey's philosophy that art emerges from lived experience. How do you see your work aligning with Dewey's concept of art as a bridge between ordinary life and broader social reflection? And there is here a comment by R.K. Jaipiran. Hello all, I am R.K. Jaipiran Sana from Northeast India. I have worked on decoloniality and theater. My first question goes to Priscilla. I would like to know more about your use of BWO in your project. So perhaps we can start with those questions and then we can go with some other questions that have appeared into the chat. So
Sure. And I want to ask our guests, our artist guests, to please write their web pages if you have something so people can connect with you and follow you. Why don't we start now with you, Rafael? Why don't you pick up the wherever you want?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to get data on what the impact of these projects are. Like I said, it's not something that is capital P politics, but it's micropolitics. It's the micropolitics of people coming across to talk to each other for the first time, or as somebody was mentioning now about breathing as an act itself of conscience, of being conscious of the moment that we are living under. So I don't believe, like I think Gregor was mentioning, well, how do these projects that are artivist not just succumb to the fact that they are born out of privilege? Well, there's many ways in which one can address that. One of the ways is precisely putting it in the street. When you have tens of thousands of people coming and speaking their mind, then you manage to create a sense that the artwork has an outcome. Now, I showed 3 projects. I could show another 10, but the problem is some of them didn't work. These are experiments. One tries things as an artivist, not because this is what's going to make your career or not because this is an opportune intervention into the politics, but rather because it's out of, how do you say in English? Estar hasta la madre. How do you say? Like when you feel like you have
Fed
no
up with.
option, right? You as a citizen with your privileges. I personally have enormous privileges. I live in Canada. I have a big team of people. It does not stop me from being concerned over the rise of nationalism in all these places. So what do? I try and make my contribution. There's other people who have other contributions. I believe that every artist is a citizen, and as a citizen, you need to react.
Thank you very much. Priscilla, would you like to add on something to this conversation?
Well, I think it's a struggle between as Rafael told us, to be part of the system and also require all the production needs. So we talked about it a few days ago with Lyz and Cesar about the artists that are in the top, that are famous or have some privilege. They don't tell us how they get to that point. So it's a continuously a struggle to get in there to survive through the arts, as I named my presentation. So it is important to close files between artists and support between us, so we can make projects that are more concerned about all our reality. I think it's important to stay consciously about what is happening in our context, in our world, in all the world, and how as an artist we can tell or we can raise our hand to say something that maybe have an impact in the art world or in our communities or in our society. So we need to be clear on what we want as an artist. And I think the activism and artivism is it's quite difficult to handle, because we have this experience at the MUAC a few months ago where an exhibition was canceled because they don't see all the impact that this exposure will be having. So it will cancel, and in this sense, we need to be conscious of what are we doing and what's our work as an artist and our concerns.
While I agree with a lot of the things that have been said, I also have to say that it's a very confusing time when it comes to positioning oneself in the political arena, particularly because there are very confusing and contradictory messages coming from different sources. So I think the committed artist today is a very important actor to refuel the system of democracy and the system of participation. But it's not easy. It's once you are in a position where if you say something, you will be punished by authorities or by groups, putting your position at risk. It is a real thing happening everywhere. Lyz, what would you have to say about this?
Well, I was thinking that it's not just for artists or for people that it's educated as an artist. For me, this is for everybody, for everyone, even for the audiences, for the citizens. I see Rafael work in the border, and I saw a woman singing, and I was thinking, how do we resist everything? In Colombia, this is kind of a train, resistance and resistance and resistance, and not just artists, everybody. Until last week, we had a terrible conflict in Catatumbo here in Colombia. And I always have thought that the only way to resist is micropolitics, and art is a way that had helped us to resist, but not just formal art. Obviously, formal art, what we can produce as artists to help and to create memory and to help people to transit from the pain, from the war, to the healing. But for me, it's music, it's the artistic and creative gestures that could help people in this moment, in these difficult situations and complexities that we have in our social realities. And I was thinking, for example, about the alabaos here in Colombia, that those are like funeral singings that we have in the Pacific zones. And I was working at a time during the peace process, and all these women that lost all their families, they're just killed singing. And I was thinking, art is not just for artists. Art is for everybody. And thinking that all this artivism is so useful and so powerful because we open the window for everybody to express and to connect and heal these complexities.
We're just about to wrap in, but I wouldn't want to leave without asking you, our three panelists, to if you want to say something final before we close in. We're about at the edge of the time. Any final thoughts that you would like to say, Rafa, Priscilla, Lyz? Would you like to add a last thought to the conversation? All right. Oh, go ahead, Rafael. Go ahead.
No. I'm waiting because I want to hear from Lyz and Priscilla.
Any final thought? We have a couple of minutes for you to finish before we wrap it up. All right.
Well, I think, I'm sorry, César. I think there were a question for me about the BWO. It's the body without organs. I don't know if I can talk about it.
If you can summarize it in 1 minute, that would be okay.
Yeah. Well, because it's a question that I saw, and it's important part of my work. It's a concept proposed by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, and I would like to tell you that when I was started to work about the body, the female body, I used literality of the body. I used to did performance and other stuff. And then I was thinking that my body or every woman body could be a part of a social posture or of a social territory. So I like to explore the concept, the body, of a body from hierarchical and oppressive structures. And I propose an open space for flows of desire and experimentation. And you can see the body without the body in my work. So it's a theme that I've been exploring. I extend it to my students and to other projects, community projects, and it results in some experimentation, feelings, desires that were converted in art. So it was a positive matter that concerns to many women or many people. So I think it's all that I have to say.
Wonderful. Any last thought, Lyz, Rafael? 1 minute.
Well,
Okay.
thank you for doing this. I hope I didn't come out as forcefully in defense of artivism in a messianic way. I don't think that the artist has a solution to the problems. I think that again, the artist does what they can. And another thing is that many times we talk about the art world as if it's one thing, but we all know that there's hundreds of different art worlds, and many of them intersect, and the artist can and should be part of different types of art worlds. That's all.
Thank you very much. And I was left with the idea that we should also reflect a little bit more from what Priscilla was saying in terms of the micropolitics that has to do with your primary tool, which is your body, to the macro politics of those ideologies flying around worldwide, and those intersections where we have to be participant actors and not just sitting around waiting to see what happened. We have to try to change. That's my feeling through the arts. With this, we conclude this panel and officially bring this session to a close. A heartfelt thanks to our wonderful panelists. Priscilla, thank you very much. Lyz, really, gracias. Muchas gracias. Rafael, thank you so much for your valuable contributions. We are also deeply grateful for the leadership of ICRRA for the kind of invitation to host this panel and discuss such important issues from a perspective of the Americas. Special thanks to Odila, Pedro, Clementine, and Christina for their support to have this done. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us today, the audience. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and that they spark new ideas and reflections. Before we wrap up, we'd like to invite you to learn more about the ICRRA network by following the link to the chat. There you can find details about our members and information how to join. You'll also discover the latest conference outcomes, including playlists with videos and all the panels. Don't forget to check out our repository where we will be soon publishing our new policy brief and conference proceedings. On behalf of the entire ICRRA network, thank you once again for your attention and participation. We look forward to seeing you at our next conference. Thank you very much. Bye now. Gracias.